Hello, I'm Bob Chaloner. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Focus on Stony Brook Southampton Hospital, your monthly program about the people, the services, and all of the programs at your local community hospital. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Typically, we talk to one of our doctors or one of our clinicians about specific programs or an illness that's being dealt with here at the hospital. We've brought in a world-class researcher who I'm sure you're going to be very, very interested in hearing from, Dr. Jorge Benach. Dr. Benach, one of the pioneers in research around Lyme disease and the discovery of Lyme disease here locally in Suffolk County at Stony Brook University. And we're very grateful that he's working with us on our Lyme disease efforts and our tick-borne disease research center. And as we all know, tick-borne diseases are a major, major concern for everyone in our communities. And we thought it would be very interesting for all of you to hear about the work that Dr. Benach has done and is continuing to do around the research. So welcome, Dr. Benach, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And just a little bit about Dr. Benach. Dr. Benach is the Toll Distinguished Professor and former Chairman from 2006 to 2017 of the Department of Molecular Genetics and Microbiology at Stony Brook University School of Medicine. During his 40-year university career, which included the pioneering identification of etiological agent of Lyme disease, he led the university's Center for Infectious Diseases and was instrumental in research initiatives which brought national research projects on biodefense and a biosafety containment lab to Stony Brook University. He's traveled the world as a speaker, renowned in the field of molecular genetics and microbiology, and is the subject of many national honors and awards, in addition to his reputation as a superb teacher. Dr. Benach was one of the earliest investigators looking into ticks and the pathogens they harbor, and is credited as an early pioneer in Lyme disease research. Additionally, we're extremely lucky to have Dr. Benach as a member of the Scientific Advisory Panel to our Tick-Borne Disease Resource Center here at Stony Brook Southampton Hospital. And we're so pleased that he's agreed to join us today on this show and talk about his role in the forefront of discovering and identifying cures and hopefully preventative measures for Lyme-borne or tick-borne diseases. Thank you again, Dr. Benach. Just to begin with, if maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up out here on Stony Brook and also your academic background.
I graduated with a PhD from Rutgers University in microbiology, and shortly after graduation in 1972 I went to work for the Bureau of Communicable Disease in the State Health Department in Albany, and I was learning how to fundamentally follow outbreaks of different infections. In fact, my very first assignment was here, actually in Montauk, on an outbreak of mosquito-borne eastern equine encephalitis at the Deep Hollow Ranch.
Okay.
And I fell in love with the place.
Right.
The place was absolutely magnificent.
You weren't living on Long Island
No,
at that
I was
point,
not. I was living in Albany.
Okay, right.
And I love the combination of the sea and the low brush and the bugs everywhere.
Right, I guess if you're researching tick-borne or bug-borne diseases.
So that was my the very first assignment that we had, and following that outbreak, which there was not much we could do at the time. I mean, the outbreak sort of ran itself out. There were horses that died. Okay. And there were no human cases. But as some people know, you might know, this is a very deadly virus, right. and about the mortality is about 80%. 80%. So there was
in humans as well.
In humans, in horses is 100% fatal.
Really?
Yes. As luck would have it, the person that was sort of behind the work being done in this outbreak was Peridurier, who was at the time the Speaker of the Assembly.
Right. Very well-known person out here.
Yes, we got to meet him, and he actually was very instrumental a number of years back.
Right.
And he came into my life at that time, and I got to know him really well, and I'll tell you more about that.
Right.
And then about 2 or 3 years later, there were beginning to be increases in the number of cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
On Long Island, really?
Yes, right around Montauk, here, North Fork.
Okay.
So it gave me an opportunity to come back.
Right.
And that's how I started to work with the whole tick-borne diseases in the field. At the time, I asked my boss, if I am going to do this with any degree of credibility, I need more training.
Right.
And then I went and I did training at the Rocky Mountain Laboratory with Willie Bergdorf, and this is 1974, 1975. So I packed...
Was that in Rocky?
In Montana, in Hamilton, Montana. So I packed my wife and my 2 kids, and off we went.
Wow.
And by the time we came back, I was fully trained in what I needed to do, and continued to work with the outbreak of spotted fever and the dermacentor ticks.
Okay, interesting. And this was all 1970s time period?
Yes, 1970s.
Great. What other pathogens were emerging at that time? What were some of the other things you were starting to see?
At the time, we were concerned with the spotted fever.
Okay.
There were cases, not just here, but they were moving, I don't know if I want to say moving, but they were also being reported in Western Suffolk.
Right.
And it became apparent that what was happening was that people that got infected here and lived here were diagnosed quickly, and the doctors here knew spotted fever from way back.
Okay.
So they received very good care. The ones that were a problem and the ones where there was some fatalities were associated with visitors that got ill here and went home elsewhere.
And their doctor maybe didn't...
Correct. The doctors were not that familiar with what to do with this, or for the matter, even diagnosing it. And this is where the fatal cases actually occurred.
Interesting. Because and was it a disease that's historically always been here, or was just emerging at that time?
There are rumors that when the Roosevelt... I'm blanking out, but the Rough Riders were camped at Deep Hollow Ranch.
Okay.
After the Spanish-American War, that there were a lot of cases among those troops.
Okay.
But I don't know that I've ever seen this written anywhere.
Okay. So they had something with them, but they weren't sure. Really interesting. And you mentioned Dr. Bergdorf or Bergdorf. That's a familiar name in the Lyme world. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with him and those early years of working with him?
We initially worked with the spotted fever with the rickettsia.
Right.
Rickettsia are very difficult organisms to work with because they're very pathogenic.
Okay.
So you need a lot of laboratory security, which they have out there, or they used to have out there.
Right.
We did not here.
What do you mean security? You're worried about it spreading?
You want to make sure that nothing escapes the lab.
Okay.
That even if you have an accident, that you contain it. So what you mean lab security, so you have very high containment.
Okay.
And you protect the environment as well as yourself.
Right, okay.
To give you an idea, the only 2 cases of laboratory deaths in the CDC in Atlanta were due to spotted fever rickettsia.
Really?
Yes. So even though I learned how to work with rickettsia at the time, by the time I came back, there was not much I could do because we just simply didn't have the security lab.
Okay.
So we started a protocol which I would send Bergdorfer the ticks from here, and I would know to analyze them up to a point, but then the continuous cultivation of these organisms had to be done there.
In the same
so that's how my relationship with him developed after I was there.
Okay. And was it already known that the organism resided in ticks? Or,
yes. That's been known for a while.
Okay, interesting. And can you tell us then how that research led to the link and the groundbreaking research around discovery of Lyme disease.
I can, but it's a little bit tortuous.
Okay.
And I have to now
It's like a detective novel, some of these things.
It is. It's by this time I was firmly here.
Okay.
And I got actually moved from Albany to Stony Brook.
Okay.
So I was in the Department of Pathology then.
All right.
And so I was working here full time, and I was a total Long Islander at this point.
All right.
And then the other organism that you alluded to, Babesia microta.
Okay.
It's a protozoa. It's a hemoprotozoa.
It's a what?
Hemoprotozoa.
What does that mean?
That means it's a protozoa of the blood. It's like malaria.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They're very similar.
Okay.
In fact, I'll tell you a little story about that too.
Yeah.
There was a person in Shelter Island who was the first case of babesiosis. He was diagnosed, I don't know if the name means anything to you here, but it must mean something to the East End in general.
Yeah.
The doctor at Shelter Island, his name was Edgar Grunwald.
Yes.
He died recently, but he alone diagnosed more cases of everything.
Really?
And I worked closely with him as well. The person that was the index case had been born in Italy,
Okay.
and he had actually served in the Italian army in the Ethiopian war.
Oh, wow.
And when he came down with this blood infection that looked like malaria, he was told, well, you have malaria, and you
Right.
must have contracted malaria in
'Cause he'd been in
Ethiopia.
Africa, right?
Yes, and he says, no, and he
Right.
denied it, and
Right.
denied it, and denied it, and few people believed him. Eventually, it became apparent that this was not malaria, that this was a parasite that is transmitted by the Ixodes tick, and the reservoir is the field mouse.
Okay.
And if this sounds familiar, it's
Yeah,
exactly the
sounds
same
very
as the
familiar,
Borrelia.
Yeah, that's right. Is it the same? It's the same tick.
It's the same tick.
Okay.
Same tick.
Okay.
And same mouse that
Okay,
actually
right.
does the same thing. As luck would have it, we reached across the aisle in Albany
Right.
because this index case was a neighbor of the governor of New York,
Oh,
Hugh
really?
Carey.
That's right. The family
Shelter
still,
Island.
family still has homes
In
on
Shelter
Shelter
Island.
Island.
So he took an immediate interest in this.
Okay.
And actually, via his health, he wasn't the health commissioner, he was his health advisor and personal friend, I believe. I don't know if this name means anything. Kevin Cahill.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Kevin Cahill is a doctor of tropical diseases. He
That's right.
works out of New York City.
Head of the Department of Health for a while. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
And he saw a number of cases of babesiosis.
Okay.
And I work with him as well. And to him, I owe the fact that we had the big first bolus of cash for us to work.
Okay.
So we're very, very thankful to him. He helped my lab enormously.
Right.
Even all the way up to the discovery of the Borrelia.
Right.
So this is now going on 1978, and with a group from the CDC, we did a serosurvey in Shelter Island and in East Hampton.
Okay.
And we wanted to know what the seroprevalence of Babesia was, because there were a number of cases of babesiosis that were transmitted by transfusion.
Okay.
This immediately told us that there were such things as
You were able
subclinical
to
cases.
link
Correct.
the blood back to local people?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Interesting.
So the blood bank put a ban on blood collections in the East End.
Interesting. Okay.
So the serosurvey was to detect the level of risk from anyone that was healthy going to donate blood. And as it turns out, the figure was between 6 and 9%.
Really?
So it was important.
Yeah.
And we were able to figure out that at the very least, until you could have a very clear handle on how to treat this infection, that the ban should stay. But
Right.
of course, I didn't make that decision. They
Right.
made it in the New York Blood Center.
Right.
But during this serosurvey, we ran into a number of the volunteers that had positive Babesia serology and also had erythema migrans.
Okay.
So clearly,
And
there was a link.
Erythema migrans, just for the lay people, that is
The
rash?
telltale skin rash of
Okay.
Lyme disease.
Okay, great.
So, go back a couple of years to Lyme, Connecticut,
Right.
where Alan Steer is working with this disease,
Okay.
with the erythema migrans and some of the work that was done in Europe long before he came onto the picture, began to shed light on the fact that this was a tick-borne disease.
Yep.
And we had this connection with the Babesia, but we didn't know what to do or what to make out with that. There were all sorts of theories, and I might add, all of them were wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you give an example of one of
Well,
those theories, or-
we thought that Babesia, being an opportunistic infection characteristic of the elderly and people that are immunosuppressed,
Right.
that people that were healthy
Right.
would get the erythema migrans of Lyme disease, and the people that were elderly and somehow immunosuppressed will get the full-blown
I see. Disease.
Babesia disease.
Okay.
And that of course was wrong.
Right.
I mean, there was no way that was going to be the case.
Right.
But we thought these things at the time.
They thought they were the same disease at that point? So.
I thought they were.
Okay, yeah, all right.
But like I said, it turned out to be wrong.
Right, right.
There were others. In fact, at that time, I worked very, very closely with the Department of Pathology here.
Okay. Here
Just
at-
down the basement.
In our hospital here in Southampton.
For hours and hours and
Wow,
hours.
Interesting.
And I learned quite a bit from them.
Right.
Because the Babesia has all sorts of other pathologies that I didn't know.
Right.
So they were terrific at the time. So there were other possibilities, and one of the possibilities was that there was another tick doing what the dermacentric ticks of the spotted fever group were doing. So we started, and you remember I mentioned that we were sending ticks to Bergdorf for the rickettsia.
That's right.
So we just switched ticks.
Okay.
I took the ticks from cases of people that were that had the erythema migrans from the serosurvey.
Okay.
And we collected ticks from there. They were mostly from Shelter Island. And that was the first shipment to Bergdorf. So he calls one day and he says, I have 3 organisms coming out of these ticks. One is a filarial worm. Another one are the rickettsia of the Xodis tick, and the other one are very strange spirochetes. Do you have serum? Do you have serum from patients? I said, well, I do.
Right.
I have all of these sera from the patients that were discovered in the serosurvey. So I sent that.
Okay.
And they reacted with the Borrelia.
They did.
They
Interesting.
reacted with the Borrelia. There was another fellow there working at the time. His name is Alan Barber, and he knew how to grow spirochetes in the lab
Okay.
because he had been working with relapsing fever spirochetes.
Okay.
So he took this medium from the relapsing fever and tried it with the organisms that were coming out of the ticks that I had sent.
Right.
And he got them to grow. And then, we could now that we had the organism growing, we could test more bloods. We had a lot more sera stored, so by the time it was all said and done, there were probably about 40 or 50 that were done, and we didn't miss a single one.
Really?
All of
Interesting.
them
All of them
were
showed up.
reactive, yes. So that was the result published in the Science paper,
Yeah. Okay.
and that was 1982.
And that's the first time that particular organism was linked back to those.
In fact, if you read that Science paper in 1982, you will say Lyme disease, spirochetosis, ?
Really?
And it was first called a treponema,
Okay.
which is a treponema is another spirochete, most or better known as the organism that causes syphilis.
Okay. Was there a thought maybe it was syphilis at that point or something? Or no?
I didn't have that thought, but there were people that did.
Okay.
There were people that did. The only question, certainly uppermost in most people's mind, is, well, this is tick-borne, and we know how syphilis is transmitted.
Exactly right.
So there was a disconnect there.
Interesting. And so the disease, Lyme disease, was recognized previously, but the real cause of it was no one knew what was causing the disease until that point.
No. In retrospect,
Yeah.
Lyme disease in a number of manifestations,
Right.
notably the skin and the nervous system,
Okay.
was really known in Europe since the beginning of the 20th century.
Really?
Yes. And there were a number of papers
Yeah.
that actually showed a connection between the skin and the neurological Lyme disease, well, the neurological whatever,
Right.
because nobody called it that at the time.
Right.
And even more to the point, a German scientist during World War I published a paper in a very obscure German journal that never made it here simply because of the war.
Okay.
And it was written in German as well,
Okay.
where he actually took a biopsy of the skin lesion and actually saw spirochetes.
It saw the spiral. Oh.
He never followed through.
Okay.
Never followed through.
Same spirochete, or it's a
Well,
different?
one would
A
have to
different
assume that they're
version.
the same.
Exactly.
That they're
Okay.
the same.
Interesting. And as a result, the spirochete is named after Bergdorf, right?
Well,
Or
I'll tell you how that
Bergdorfer?
happened. When I came back from Montana,
Yeah. Were you upset it wasn't Benach?
Bergdorfer was my mentor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How could we fight that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Well, good for
What the
you.
hell?
Good for you.
But that was
Right.
the politically correct thing to say, right?
Absolutely.
He had more claim because he
Yeah.
saw them first.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
And Barber had a very strong claim as well because he grew them.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, this was I think this was clearly a combination of serendipity and a combination of different threads coming
Right.
together. If there wouldn't have been Babesia, there would not have been Borrelia.
Right.
Had I not been to Bergdorfer doing rickettsial work, we wouldn't be
You
having this
wouldn't have known
conversation.
to link it back with the work he was
no.
doing.
So,
It's interesting. I always thought, because I always thought the discovery of the Lyme disease came first, and Babesia and all the other things
No,
came after.
no.
That's interesting, though. Yeah,
No.
it was.
So came back, and we had a network of physicians, a lot of them still
Yeah.
from here,
Okay.
that started sending us blood specimens.
Right.
And the object here was to grow the Borrelia in the lab. Little did we know then that Borrelia doesn't particularly like to be in the blood.
It doesn't?
No, so we had we didn't have a very good recovery.
Okay.
We isolated it from about 4 patients out of maybe 40,
Okay.
and then of course that fulfilled the whole thing with a cautious postulate.
Okay.
And we published that in the New England Journal in '83,
Okay.
along with Steer. Same year.
Up in Connecticut.
Yeah, and then yes, up in Connecticut. And then we found that the organism was coming from the mice, from the field mice. That was another big paper.
How did you do that? Trace
Same
the
way.
same route?
We had people that went out and collected the mice,
Okay.
took the blood from the mice, and put it in culture.
Interesting.
And that was better yield than with a human.
Okay.
But that also came out in Science in '83. And then the end of the discovery was working with this veterinarian that happened to be our veterinarian
Yeah.
and a good friend. He said, gee, I think there's something like Lyme disease in dogs.
Really?
And we did that.
Yeah.
Also, I think it was that year.
Okay.
And the whole field of canine Lyme disease came about
Yeah.
from that initial work.
Interesting.
So that was the general story of the discovery.
Is it the same pathogen in dogs
Yes.
as it is in human beings?
Yes. Same pathogen, same tick.
How has your notion of Lyme disease changed, I guess, since all of these discoveries, and since you made that connection?
I'd gone back to that connection.
Yeah.
We got sidetracked. I mean, the canons of science are pretty well established.
Right.
You do your organismic research. You do basic fundamental studies of their proteins, the responses, the antibodies that are made, and I got caught up on that too.
Okay.
And this is what I've done fundamentally since the 80s.
Right.
But I am now convinced that there is a polymicrobial infection that is present in our ticks.
Okay.
They carry Babesia, they carry Borrelia, they carry another bacteria called Anaplasma,
Right.
they carry a virus which is called Powassan. There's another Borrelia that is a relapsing fever Borrelia that is present here
Okay.
in at least in our environment. And we have a lot of patients that may be infected with more than one.
Okay. And maybe that's why they're sicker or less sick, or yeah.
That's the general idea,
Yeah.
but I think we need to prove that.
Okay.
I don't think I don't think it's low-hanging fruit. I think you're going to have to work
A
at
lot
it.
of work on
Yeah.
it. Exactly. I know that there's a lot of frustration around people who exhibit symptoms of Lyme disease and they aren't necessarily cultured with it right away, and then also people who've been treated, but yet the symptoms seem to persist for much longer, and then the notion of, kind of long-term, and I know there's lots of theories around about that right now, correct? And so,
Yeah, the polymicrobial approach
Yeah.
is probably a likely one.
right.
And when you
Yeah, I guess if you're only treating one thing, you might be missing all
Correct,
the others, right?
correct.
Okay. Interesting. What other discoveries? I mean, as a result of that, clearly finding that organism probably opened up a whole field of research then that you're able to try and
my
expand.
God, yes. There's not probably.
Yeah.
I looked recently. There's over 30,000 papers
Really?
written on Borrelia/Lyme disease.
Wow.
And as you know, it's a worldwide
Yeah, absolutely.
infection. So all the way from Japan, circle the globe, back to the East Coast.
Okay. There's always these urban myths floating around. I mean, one of the ones that you hear so often out here is with Plum Island right offshore, and it was something happened at Plum Island, and that's why we ended up with so much Lyme disease out here. You've probably heard the stories, and just your
Many
thoughts
times,
on them.
many
Yeah,
times.
yeah,
It's cute. It's a cute story.
Yeah.
It's totally lacking in
Any truth,
in any basis whatsoever.
yeah.
There is a paper that was done by this fellow Sam Telford, who works out of Tufts in Boston,
Okay.
where he took museum specimens of mice and ticks.
Okay.
And by museum specimens, we're talking about 300-400 years old.
Okay.
And he actually determined that some of them were infected with a Borrelia organism.
Really?
Yes.
So that was going to be my next question. How long has it been out here? So, yeah.
You never know, but I would say very long.
Right.
Very
right,
long.
Okay.
Very long. I mean, the idea that this organism is very well meshed with its hosts
Right.
probably points to a very long relationship.
Okay. Why do you think? I grew up in New York, and and we never really started hearing about people getting Lyme disease until the 80s and maybe 90s. And did it exist, or is it increased in prevalence? And what are your thoughts about that? Why is it something that we're only?
You must have heard about the Montauk knee.
Yes. Yeah.
It's Montauk knee Lyme disease.
Okay. Okay. So I think that's
I have a theory,
right.
But I stress,
Right.
it's a
just
theory.
Right.
And I'll say it again, it's a theory.
Right.
I think in the 70s, in the late 70s, DDT was sprayed liberally.
Right.
It's a residual chlorinated hydrocarbon.
Okay.
And it was sprayed for potato crops.
Yeah.
It was sprayed for mosquitoes.
Right.
And
I remember as a kid, they go out and fog the streets
correct,
with it. Yeah.
correct. And stupid kids would,
Yeah,
run behind
I was
them.
one of them. Right, exactly.
No, not stupid.
No, I was stupid. Yeah. Unknowing kids,
yeah,
let's put it that way.
And I think that a lot of the ticks were suffered
Okay.
as non-target organisms.
Okay.
So they were controlled. The minute you remove that,
Okay.
I think the ticks
Okay.
started
Started
they had
to
no
return.
no means of being controlled in any way.
Okay.
And I think this is what makes the most sense to me.
Right.
There are others. There are
Right.
other people that will tell you that it's the increase in the number of deer,
Right.
that we have invaded suburbia, and we're more in contact.
Right.
And I mean, all of these have merit.
The return of the forests, I've
Correct,
heard, which
correct.
in states like Connecticut.
But I don't think we know that. I don't think we know. And you know that Austrian guy that was
Is that true? I heard that.
yes
story,
in the Alps.
The Iceman that
The
was
Iceman,
frozen
yes,
in
the
there, yeah.
Iceman by PCR, he was
Okay.
infected with Borrelia.
He was,
Yes.
okay. So this is not something that was invented
No.
in a lab in
No,
Plum
and it
Island
most
somewhere.
certainly did not come out of Plum Island.
Okay, all right, excellent. Why here more than others? Is it something that exists everywhere? It's just it happened to be identified here first? Is that?
It got identified here first, but I do think that here we,
Yeah.
in Long Island, have a very unique ecosystem
Okay,
that I think is modified by the ocean on
Right.
both sides,
right,
so that our winters are less damaging,
right.
and our summers may be certainly more humid,
Okay, yes, absolutely.
and ticks like that.
Okay,
However, we're not unique. I mean, the Lyme disease and all the other ones are spreading up the Hudson Valley.
right. Yeah, we're hearing more and more about
yes.
that. Even in Maine, I'm hearing about
Correct,
cases of
and
it,
even
so-
in Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe with the warming climate or whatever, that's something that's happening. We're just about out of time, unfortunately, but could you talk about maybe, we've now seen another tick appear, this Lone Star tick. Maybe we're just recognizing it, but, I know it carries some diseases too, and they're probably, since your research, we're looking at all the ticks about what they carry and what we're seeing with the Lone Star tick.
I have an entry in my lab book. Well, when I stopped being chair, I had to go from a big office to a smaller office, and so I had to get rid of a lot of stuff. So I went over old records, and in 1984 there was a collection of an Amblyoma americanum female in Fire Island. 3 exclamation marks.
And that's the Lone Star tick?
That's a Lone Star tick.
Okay, interesting.
Today, and I have to say anecdotally, I think it's the most abundant tick in Long
Yeah.
Island. It's very aggressive. All 3 stages bite,
Right,
and unlike the other ticks that wait until you brush past them,
right.
these actually seek you.
I've actually been sitting on a lawn chair.
And they
and
come
had
to
it,
you,
and
right?
Suddenly it's walking up the side of the chair toward
Correct.
me. Yeah, exactly
That's,
right.
yeah, and that's frightening.
Right. Yeah, it is.
So they do carry an organism which is called Ehrlichia.
Okay,
Ehrlichia is causes a bacterial disease that is mostly like Babesia in the elderly and
Okay.
people that have immune dysfunction.
okay,
And then the cases of ehrlichiosis have steadily increased
interesting.
in Suffolk County
Okay.
the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay,
In addition to that, they are tied to this new syndrome, which is the meat allergy,
Right, that's right.
of which Erin is a primary.
Erin McGinty,
yes,
that's right.
yes, and I've learned everything about this from her actually,
Yeah.
because this is where this is going.
Right,
Who knows? But
absolutely.
we need to watch
Yeah.
for this tick.
Okay. And I've heard there's another one, the Asian longhorn tick or something.
Yeah, although I don't know. I've heard that it doesn't bite people.
Okay,
So if that stays like that,
right. Let's hope it stays
Yeah,
that
right?
way. We have enough of these other ticks, exactly. Well, I've got to believe that as a result of your research that the ticks, which we never really thought about much, now they're being, every tick's being examined, and hopefully a lot of research being done on them at this point to try and
I
identify
think
what
there
they're
is.
carrying.
I think we now have motivated the philanthropic sector.
Right,
Government is still the mainstay. I mean,
Right.
we are scientists and we write grants to the NIH,
right,
and we're judged
Right.
by our peers, and we get them or not. But
right.
there are things that are uniquely ours here
All right,
that the NIH would consider as a local problem.
okay,
And this is where philanthropy and the state and even the municipalities
right, can help us.
can help.
That's right.
Can help.
Right. Well, unfortunately, this is a fascinating story. I really appreciate your taking the time with us today to talk about it, and clearly we all owe you a great deal of gratitude for the research you've done in identifying this link and the diseases, and hopefully now we have so much more knowledge to help make ourselves safe, I think.
Well, you can
Yeah.
treat it.
Yeah, exactly
You can
right.
treat
Now we know how to treat, and we know what we're treating exactly. I guess previously they didn't, but
No, thank you for having me.
my pleasure, Dr.
This is very
Benach.
nice.
Thank you so much, and I would like to thank Dr. Benach for sharing the history and all of his colleagues in the research community for the great work that they're doing. If anyone has any concerns or would like some additional information, one of the resources we've made available is our local regional tick-borne disease resource center, and the website is www.eastendtickresource.org. We have a lot of information on there. We have a telephone number with our wonderful Rebecca Young nurse who's available to answer questions. For anyone that needs additional resources, please call. We know this is an issue and a concern for many of you, and we'll do everything we can to help you get good information. Thank you all for watching us today. I'd like to thank our friends, as always, at CTV for producing the program and airing it in our Southampton communities. Our friends at LTV for airing it in our East Hampton communities. If any of you have a question or concern or just need help navigating the healthcare system here in the East End, please feel free to call my office at 631-726-8555. Thank you, everyone, and good health.